Rag Radio.
Jim Rutherford is shooting pictures, and Grace Alfar of ZGraphix, that's at zgraphix.blip.tv, is, and this will be videotaped, and the video will be up all over the place too. They get it up on mobile broadcast news and YouTube and whatever. David Rovics, professional flat-picking rabble-rouser. David Rovics is an American indie singer-songwriter and activist for peace and social justice. He lives in Portland, Oregon, and tours regularly on 4 continents, playing for audiences large and small at cafes, pubs, universities, churches, union halls, and protest rallies, and also occupied banks.
Indeed.
And squatter sites. He has shared the stage with a veritable who's who of the left in 24 countries and has had his music featured on Democracy Now!, BBC, Al Jazeera, and elsewhere. His essays are published on Counterpunch and Truth Out. And the 200-plus songs that he makes available for free on the web have been downloaded more than 1 million times. David Rovics grew up in a family of classical musicians in Wilton, Connecticut, and became a fan of populist regimes early on. By the early 90s, he was a full-time busker, and we might ask you about that, in the Boston subways. And by the mid-90s, he was traveling the world as a professional flat-picking rabble-rouser. Amy Goodman said that David Rovics is the musical version of Democracy Now! And I love this one. Andy Kershaw of BBC said, if the great Phil Oakes were to rise from the dead today, he would probably be hailed as the new David Rovics. Phil Oakes, you know, there's a little bit of a sense of Phil Oakes in your work, in your voice quality, in your tempo and everything about it. Is Phil Oakes, was he a role model? Was he somebody that you admired coming of age?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't first discover Phil's music until kind of late. I mean, I was probably like 19 or so before I discovered it, but he was certainly very influential. And I learned a lot of his songs and sang them in the subways for years. He was one of many songwriters that I did that too. But
and that's that you did that too. That you did that with, in a sense.
Yeah.
You were what do you call it? A busker?
Yeah. Well,
what
it's usually in the U.S. it's more typical to call it a street musician, but so many towns don't have anything like that we don't even have that vocabulary either. But the standard term in Britain is busker, and in Boston as well, it's commonly called busking, which is just street music, just playing music on the street for money, for tips.
We don't have any subways in Austin, but you can't turn a corner without there being a musician somewhere.
This city is full of musicians. Yeah, and I wonder, since they passed the healthcare thing where musicians can get free healthcare, I wonder how many more musicians moved to Austin.
I don't know. The problem with Austin is that Austin is getting so expensive that it's even hard. It's hard for the sort of really down for the people who made Austin what it is in terms of the music scene to even stay here to keep surviving, because it's becoming a very expensive city. But,
well, they're coming to Portland, and I don't know where else they're going, but they're coming to Portland. I can tell you that.
Yeah, well, I understand there's people who go back and forth between Portland and Austin. That there's a lot of interaction. That's what.
Oh, definitely. They're two of those magnetic poles of places with lots of alternative musician types. Yeah.
We're going to talk about your spring vacation in Europe because it's wonderful. You wrote 24 pages I printed out.
Was it? I didn't print it out. So
in your blog. Where's your blog?
It's at they can get there at davidrovics.com, but it's on Blogspot, songwritersnotebook.blogspot.com.
And that's also where they can go to download music, is that right?
Yeah, davidrovics.com. Just click on audio, video. You'll find all sorts of music.
Yeah. The reason that I think that your trip is interesting was that you stayed in all kinds of weird places. You did gigs at all kinds of strange spots, and it's a real good way to talk not only about your music and your politics and how they intersect, but also what's going on in Europe, what's going on with the movement in Europe, with the anarchist scene. And I know I guess you consider yourself an anarchist, do you? I know you're a member of the Wobblies.
Yeah, I don't throw. Really, you don't have to be an anarchist to be in the Wobblies. But
Well,
I tend to let people define me for them by talking about politics, because these words I find, I mean, I don't begrudge anybody for calling themselves an anarchist or whatever else, but these words are kind of, to me, kind of limited use because nobody knows what they mean.
They put you in a box too, sort of, don't they?
Yeah, but you don't even know what box you're putting yourself into because everybody's got a different definition of the word, you know.
Right.
So once it's like that, then it's hard. So sometimes I use the term libertarian socialist just to confuse people, you know, because it's two words. So then they have to actually try to figure out how they might work together, and they seem sort of like they might be in opposition to each other, but actually I'd say they are very they complement each other well, but a Stalinist wouldn't think so.
I've used that term myself, but the problem is that libertarian has taken on such a meaning now that I prefer not to use it. I think.
Of course, the part that people don't like about it is just the part that is not socialistic about it. So if you were trying to figure out how could libertarianism be socialist at the same time, well, then you end up, I think, basically with a strong welfare state, but strong protection for the rights of individuals and groups and you know.
I think it would be that the lesson that libertarians, I think, need to learn is that the massive global corporations are more of a danger than governments.
Exactly.
And that's the sort of
socialist
step
part.
that they seem not to have taken.
Absolutely.
So, how did you start? How did you get political, and how did you start writing political songs?
I guess I got political when I was like 12. And the anti-nuclear movement was happening in New England, especially where I was going to summer camp, and it was in a town that had a nuclear reactor in it. So we were directly exposed to not only nuclear radiation but the anti-nuke movement. So that was definitely my introduction to sort of activism and people trying to, you know, and it was a good introduction because actually, you know, as at least partially as a result of the anti-nuke movement, we haven't built any new nuclear reactors since then. So, you know,
and thanks to what happened in Japan,
Yeah,
hopefully
I
we
don't
won't
think
build
we'll
any more.
Yeah.
Not only that, but the finances have become almost impossible.
They
for them
never
to make
made
it
sense
work.
in the first place. It was always a subsidized industry, subsidized by governments and bent on building nuclear arsenals, really, I think.
You consider yourself a songwriter mostly, is that true? You
Yeah,
define yourself as
I'm a songwriter. Well, I definitely am a songwriter, so that's easy to, you know, yeah. Then I sometimes terms like protest singer I kind of shy away from because I'm just doing what songwriters have been doing for millennia, which is writing songs about what's happening in the world.
Yeah.
So actually, I'm just part of this really long-standing mainstream of music. And it's only in the past century with the music industry that has become not the case. And then the music industry coined the term, I believe they coined the term protest music, in order to sort of put us in a little box and say
It's
that
interesting
we're not
because
normal.
when I came of age, when I grew up, the folk singing music movement was big, and then a lot of folk singers started really dealing with topical, stuff. And I remember that the term protest music, protest singers, then evolved. I don't hear that used that much anymore. But I know, like I said,
sometimes.
you're a singer-songwriter and an activist for peace and social justice, I guess, or whatever.
Yeah, they have they have particular trouble with trying to categorize people like Tom Morello, because you can't. He's already a rock star, so you can't call him a protest singer because you can't be a rock star and a protest singer at the same time. Apparently, So, I don't know why, but this is just as far as industry speak goes. So then whenever he's involved, or Steve Earle, or somebody who they can't just they know they can't pigeonhole as a protest singer, then they have to try to get creative and describe, who are these people and what are they doing singing at this protest,
Right.
But sometimes I think they even refer to him as a protest singer too. I don't know.
Tom Morello? He's certainly right out there on the front lines.
Oh, he is.
Consistently.
He could easily be considered a protest singer, any just as easily as I could, or whatever. But But you're not supposed to be famous and be a protest singer at the same time. So he's kind of got a little bit of too much fame to be a typical protest singer.
When he was here for South by Southwest, and they did an event, an outdoor event outside of a venue with Occupy Austin, and it was apparently a pretty phenomenal thing. I think the cops came and they tried to. I think they shut down the PA system, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. But
oh my! Here in the Music City.
Here in Music City.
One thing they did not do was shut down the PA system in Nashville. Anyway,
Well, it's interesting because the Occupy Austin, because there was a pretty substantial Occupy movement here, and there was a big event with a couple of thousand people at the first one marching and everything. And the police chief was there, and the fire chief was there, and they were all hobnobbing and glad handing. And we had a picture of the fire chief signing a position to protect public employees' unions. So Austin has this at least veneer of progressivism. And I mean, when it comes right down to it, the city's controlled by the real estate interests, like most cities. But but the environmental movement, of course, is very substantial here. Okay, before we move on any further, I want you to sing something for us.
All right.
I'll use your own judgment.
All right. Let's see here.
Treat us.
I turned on my TV, though it was hard to see these men who would be head of state. What a great country from sea to shining sea. We watched the Republicans debate. Newt stood with his third wife and said, "You bet your life the president is a red. He wants to tax the rich a lot, take your limo and your yacht. He wants to have the bankers' heads. And if he gets in again, he'll paint the White House pink, and then he'll hire Chavez as his VP. Then we'll be right on track to give capitalism the sack, along with the insurance industry. If only it were true, if only it were true, I'd be so happy, wouldn't you? If only it were true, if only it were true, if only it were true. He'll give everyone food stamps and wheelchair ramps. He'll subsidize windmills and maple syrup. He'll cripple industries with eco-friendly policies, and pretty soon we will be just like Europe. He'll shut down oil wells, give out solar cells to every home in Delaware and Illinois. He'll ban logging in the parks. He'll send the works of Karl Marx to the homes of every American girl and boy. He'll abolish pesticides. He'll be giving out free rides and free lunches, too, in his high-speed trains. He'll start lots of public works full of union perks. He'll fill all the cities up with bicycle lanes. If only it were true, if only it were true, I'd be so happy, wouldn't you? If only it were true, if only it were true, if only it were true. Watch out, his critics tell, this shall be our death knell. He'll pull the troops out and end all of our wars. He'll gut military spending, our empire will be ending, and soon we'll be invaded by the Moors. He'll legalize all drugs, give away beer mugs and hookahs to every child, and Korans. He'll ban religion from the schools, give 40 acres and a mule to every person who makes less than 50 grand. He'll close Guantanamo, to torture he'll say no. He'll make us all drive electric cars. He'll reinstate the fairness doctrine, take off that damn flag pin, and he'll put Rupert Murdoch behind bars. If only it were true, if only it were true, I'd be so happy, wouldn't you? If only it were true, if only it were true, if only it were true. If only it were true, if only it were true, I'd be so happy, wouldn't you? If only it were true, if only it were true, if only it were true.
And how true it isn't, right? Speaking of the Republican, what do you think about what's going on? We've got about 2 minutes before we take a break. What do you think about what's going on in the political scene?
I think it's just going from horrible to even worse. Both parties are completely, not completely, but almost entirely bought and sold by banks and oil companies, and the banks and oil companies are duking it out to figure out who can dominate the world. It's I think that's about how much difference there is between the two parties. There's about as much difference as there is between a bank and an oil company.
It's, Jack Smith wrote an article that we read in the Rag blog this week. Jack Smith, who used to edit The Guardian, which was the big national left newspaper in this country, wrote an article, and he said basically that if Obama gets reelected, it's going to be more of the same mess. But if Romney gets elected, it's that same mess on steroids. The scary thing is not that Obama has been a disappointment, a great disappointment to all progressives, but how really frightening the right wing has become in this country.
Well, that's sort of always what we have going for us, is the choice between a corrupt Democratic Party or an absolutely lunatic Republican Party. Corrupt and lunatic. But I think it's the choices are dismal, and really, ultimately, I think the only solution lies in a mass movement, and we have a sustained mass movement of millions of people who are ready to get arrested for acts of nonviolent civil disobedience. That's what we need, and nothing's going to change until we have it.
You heard it from David Rovics. I'm Thorne Dreyer. This is Rag Radio. We'll be right back.
I don't drive a car because they run on gas, but if I did, it'd run on biomass. I ride a bike or sometimes a skateboard, so fuck off all you drivers and your yuppie hordes sitting all day.
Okay, David Rovics. I'm a better anarchist than you are, I believe that. Is that right, Tracy?
Yeah. That's provided by our guest today.
Except you didn't get to the first refrain, so they wouldn't know. But I can sing it for you with the edited version without the swear word. You bleeped that out? That worked out okay?
Yeah.
No,
We got a
fine.
fancy system here.
Tracy's fast on the button there. Okay, David Rovics is a singer-songwriter and our peace activist and an activist for social justice, and has done some pretty phenomenal things. And one of the things that you've done is make all of your work available online for free download. Tell me about your philosophy there.
It is. I guess the way I usually try to talk about it is by putting it into like two different categories. There's the principle category and there's the practicality category. And overall, the conclusion that just skipping to the conclusion is for independent artists, it is both practical and good in principle to put all your music up for free download. But I think basically they're separate arguments, and they're both I think interesting arguments. But in terms of the principle, there's the issue of like exactly what is originality and what deserves to be copyrighted and patented and stuff. And of course, I'd say that like most sensible people who are familiar with the whole question, I think 99% of things that are patented and copyrighted out there have no right to be either patented or copyrighted. But then there's the question that whole issue is trying to get at is like, how do scientists and writers and researchers and musicians and stuff
make money,
make a living? And then in terms of the practicality aspect of it, that's where that comes in, which is it's a separate but related question, I guess. And for the practicality issue for musicians, for independent musicians specifically, the system has been broken since at least 1980, in terms of any real possibility for talented songwriters or bands or anything to actually get airplay on commercial radio. And so, given that situation, when you're talking about, not making your stuff freely available just in order to get hopefully played on some community radio stations, well, that doesn't make any sense. And so, community radio just isn't a big enough phenomenon for you to ignore the internet, which is kind of what people are doing if they don't put their stuff up for free download, because the internet is like radio, basically. It's not, if you think of it like a place to buy things, then it doesn't work that way. That's not how it behaves mostly. People mostly are just going there to look for free things to watch and listen to. And so if your stuff isn't up there for free, people just won't find it unless you're already famous because of conventional airplay or because you're Garrison Keillor or whatever. But if you're not already one of these very few people who gets a national airplay on commercial radio or NPR or something like that, then you ignore the internet at your peril, really. But shockingly, a lot of musicians do, and either out of principle or because they think it's impractical. But if you put your music up for free download, people find it. If they like it, they find it. If they don't like it, they don't share it, and it doesn't go anywhere. You can have your music up for free download, all over the place, and you'll have almost no buddy downloading it if they don't like it. But if they like it, they'll share it with each other.
You ask for donations, I think, too, at your website when people download.
Yeah, and I get almost no donations.
That's what I was going to ask. Does anybody actually do it?
But my sort of little what I've started doing with my most recent 2 recordings is when I put a new recording up on the web, now I'm putting it up in a place where people have to give me their email in order to get the free download. So then when they have to give me their email, first of all, I get more people on my email list, but also they're about at least 100 times more likely to donate when they have to give their email. Because then they're a real person, and then so then they're, and I'm not trying to say they should be paying for it. I'm just trying to collect email addresses basically, which also means a lot fewer people download the newest stuff because a lot of people just don't want to give their email. But if they do, they often have a little comment saying, "Sorry, I'm unemployed. I'll donate next time," or they actually donate.
Yeah. It's as long as we're talking about the internet for a moment here. The internet, of course, has been a revolutionary phenomenon in many ways, and of course, for whether you're a writer or a musician, the whole question of whether the traditional record labels, the traditional forms of distribution for music, and the traditional forms of distribution for books. The bookstores are closing. Amazon has taken over for all of that. It's just really changed things in so many ways, and we don't know where that's going because it keeps changing all of the time. But do you think that and people blame the internet for dumbing us down, and for isolating us in some ways, but it's also been an incredible force for democratization and for getting the word out in various ways. What do you think right now? What's your feeling about,
Overall, I think it's the best technology that we've ever had. But I think the whole question of technology, any kind of technology, I think it always you have to look at it. I think in terms of what does the overall activity do to society and do to people and their brains and everything else. And I'd say that anything that involves a computer screen or a television or radio or recorded music or a car or central heating or central air conditioning, all that stuff I think is terribly negative in terms of the impact on human society overall. And we'd be all much, much better off back in
It takes you one step away from real experience.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what happens when you introduce a radio into a primitive so-called community somewhere? Like I've heard so many stories like this. You introduce the first radio comes to some little tribal village out in the middle of the jungle somewhere, and whereas people used to all get together and sing songs together every night at sunset, now they all get together and listen to the professionals in the capital city sing the songs on the radio, and they stop singing. I mean, this kind of stuff. I think technology is mostly really bad for society and for human psychology, and especially passive technologies. But the internet is better than all these other technologies because it's interactive, I think. So that the democratic aspect of it is, if you're going to have technology, it should be the internet. But we're all better off without it. I think we're all much better off just having human, physical, real contact with each other. And in terms of live music, just taking that specific example, which is one I think about a lot, being a musician, where we would all have been so much better off before recorded music. I mean, you think of how many musicians people had to be musicians if they wanted to play music, or they had to hire a live musician. I mean, those were your options. You couldn't stick a record on,
Okay, I want to talk about your European tour, your trip, your spring vacation in just a second, because I think that's and the way you wrote about it, it sounds like it was a pretty phenomenal experience. First, I'd like for you to play something else for us.
Yeah, sure.
We need more music. The people need music.
It was in the 1970s. The fuel crisis had begun. The choices were presented to us as if we had none. Leaders of industry said they could solve the problem by mastering the power of the radioactive atom. Some folks in Western Jutland got a notion in their heads. They thought there might be something they could offer up instead. A few hundred people gathered at a little place called Tvin and declared their will to harness the power of the wind. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. There were many who said their science wasn't sound, that such a mighty windmill would simply topple to the ground. Some of them were scientists, the vast majority were not. But they knew with years of effort, you could do a lot. Word about the project spread far and wide. 100,000 visitors came to help and to advise. Until one day these windmill builders drove in with a crane and lifted up their giant wings with a mighty chain. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. When Tvindkraft was completed, it reached up to the sky. Its wings churned in the air. At 54 meters high, the critics all fell silent. No one now was jeering, as even industry agreed. This was some damn fine engineering. The wind regaled Jutland from the North Atlantic Sea, as it was seamlessly converted into electricity. It was power for the people, leukemia for none, when they declared in Denmark, just south of the midnight sun. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. They gave away the patents. They said knowledge should be free. And their plans were copied by a newborn industry. Soon Denmark would be known as a windmill building nation. And it all started with some hippies at the Tvindkraft power station. Debates were held in Parliament about which way things should go. Build a nuclear reactor? The majority said no. It could have gone quite differently. In much of the world it did, except for those in Ulfborg who said we're getting off the grid. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world.
David Rovics, I'm Thorne Dreyer, this is Rag Radio. Did you write that on your recent trip?
No, I wrote it on the trip before that one.
Okay. It was wonderful. I know how long were you gone on this last trip? I know you traveled the world all the time. But,
I was in Europe for 2.5 months, and then in Chicago for a week
right,
before
at the
going home.
NATO
yeah.
stuff, and we'll talk about that. You were in everywhere from Belfast and Glasgow to Denmark and Norway. You played at clubs like the Wee Folk Club and Filthy Nasties.
Filthy McNasties.
Huh? Filthy Nasties. You ate vegan food with squatters in Switzerland. You played with and you in an occupied bank building in Belfast with Tommy Sands, the legendary Irish singer Tommy Sands. You went to the biggest hole in Europe, and you were met by a guy on a bicycle in a pink skirt. It's just all of the stuff you talk about is just wonderful. And I mean, it was like you did lots of stuff that was involved with, you were at big May Day demonstrations in Denmark or May Day activities, events and stuff. Tell us a little bit about that trip and what you learned from it, about what's going on over there. And about your work and your art and how it relates to it. I mean, you played to single-digit numbers and hundreds. I mean, and it was all different kinds of crowds and different kinds of people.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, what I was doing in that essay was basically just painting a picture of what the tour was like, but picking the moments that come to mind that seemed more memorable than others. So there were a lot of really good gigs that I didn't mention in there because I'm not just trying to describe good gigs or something. I'm trying to talk about the if somebody comes to meet me outside the coal mine on a bicycle with a pink skirt, that automatically gets to go in the essay, because it's just,
Yeah.
But I think that there's in terms of political left-wing activity in Northern Europe right now, it's not a particular high point by any means any more than it is in North America, except for Quebec. Which is the notable exception right now in terms of very mobilized population and a really active movement happening right now. But otherwise, I'd say like North America and Northern Europe are both at a pretty low tide in terms of left-wing political activity. Although, I mean, in terms of like really soft left, there's some activity in terms of like, electorally, also, pretty radical left parties getting elected into parliament to some extent in various countries. But in terms of like on the street, like what's happening right now is not, not really, it's not a high point, but there's always stuff going on. There's always things to write about. There's always, dozens of people here, hundreds of people here who are doing all sorts of great stuff. So that's a constant, and that's kind of what I was trying to
One
get
group
across.
that I guess is involved in electoral politics is the Pirate Party, and I know their roots aren't in the left really.
No,
but it's certainly an
very
interesting
exciting
phenomenon.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And they're getting more and more seats in national parliament and regional state parliaments all over Germany and also Sweden. And it's really neat because they just have to, like their main platform has to do with music and being free and everything being open source and drastically changing intellectual property laws and stuff like that. But they're at the root of that is a real anti-corporate mentality, a very egalitarian mentality, although they're not necessarily coming out of the left. So then when it comes to all sorts of other questions, they have to hash it out, figure out where they stand on things like war and peace and little issues like that. When they're in government, they have to have a position on these things. So, yeah, great stories coming out of there.
Seemed like there were a number of references to squatters in occupied buildings and stuff like that you.
Yeah. The squatters.
The squatters thing is happening in this country to some extent, but certainly not like it is over there. I don't think.
No, and the laws are much more amenable to squatting in Europe as well, but.
And we're not talking about a crouching posture.
Yeah, no. So we're talking about taking over an abandoned building and doing something useful with it. And this is, I'm surprised at how little that happens here, where there are so many more abandoned buildings than in Europe, like here in the U.S. I mean, not necessarily Austin, but New York City is the only place in the U.S. where there's been a comparable squatters movement that it was that is and was very much like the ones in Europe in terms of also culturally, like coming out of the punk rock scene to some extent. I mean, that being the root, the cultural roots of the squatters movement, it was very much linked with the beginning of punk rock. I mean, part of that is just coincidental probably, but that's what was happening at the time. So that's certainly the ethos and the music and the politics is coming out of the punk rock scene from the late 70s and 80s.
It's interesting. We talked about protest singers, but the punk rock was almost inherently political, wasn't it?
Absolutely, and of course, to be a protest singer, you have to be, pretty much like a white person with an acoustic guitar. Anybody else is
It's an
something
intellectual
else,
concept in some ways.
Yeah,
Something.
yeah.
So,
Sometimes, like black musician would have an acoustic guitar, and they automatically would get called blues musician, which is even more annoying for them than it could be for others. Because of course, just because you're black with an acoustic guitar doesn't mean you're a blues musician by any means. But but with bands, they're bands, so they're not protest singers. But but the punk rock. Has been political from the roots, and also the whole idea, the whole do-it-yourself ethic of punk rock, and the whole idea that, like, well, I think also, you put it in context and you see where did this first stuff around 76, 77. I mean, it was at a time, it's the mid 70s was the ultimate time in terms of the conventional music industry of the sort of guitar god, the sort of, the highly technical, perfect sort of classically trained heavy metal guitarist, this, and then, the punk rock thing was just like, saying screw all that technical stuff.
It emerged out of a bunch of garages. Basically.
So. I mean, it was very much the ethic of rock and roll and its roots too. It's just like three chords and the truth.
Right. Okay, David Rovics is my guest, singer and songwriter. I'm Thorne Dreyer, and this is Rag Radio. Be right back.
I've seen you in the markets, I've seen you in the streets, and at your political conventions. Talking of your crusade, talking of your nation, and other things too terrible to mention. And you proclaim your Christianity, you proclaim your love of God, you talk of apple pie and mom. I just got one question and I want an answer, tell me, who would Jesus bomb?
I'm Thorne Dreyer. You were listening to David Rovics. Who would Jesus bomb? Was the last question there. Who would Jesus bomb? Nobody, perhaps, David?
I suspect nobody.
David Rovics, Amy Goodman said that David Rovics is the musical version of Democracy Now! The piece we played earlier, with warning, we had to squelch something, beep something out. You certainly say what you feel, but you pointed out at one point, in the piece you wrote, you said, at least I'm not as offensive as Attila the stockbroker. Who is Attila the stockbroker?
He is a good friend from Brighton, England, who was at the real ground floor of the punk rock scene in England at the time, and fully embraced both the left-wing politics of the punk movement as well as the tendency towards anything that's offensive or disgusting. And so his poetry and his music is a mix of sort of left-wing politics and what sort of jokes related to excrement, genitalia, and other things that, just anything that you can try to make somebody squirm with, including actually like maggots and, all sorts of other, larvae, anything that makes people uncomfortable, basically.
You did a gig with him in this last...
We've done 11 tours together.
11 tours together. So you're the kind of sweet guy in that sense.
Yeah, it's definitely a good cop, bad cop kind of setup. Where like, you don't like this like punk rocker who purposefully avoided ever learning how to tune his mandola, then you can listen to this nice, sweet, political American dude.
It's in a completely different vein. You had said, and I mentioned that you did a gig in an occupied bank building in Belfast, and then you said also that you were in Glasgow, and you said that Irish republicanism was even bigger in Scotland than in Ireland. Tell us about Tommy Sands.
Tommy Sands? Well, I mean, Tommy Sands. I guess you could certainly say he's an Irish Republican, but not in the sense that people would tend to mean that. I mean, Tommy Sands always has been brilliant. I think at really remaining open to both sides of the equation, all sides of it really, and to really having friends and confidants in both basic camps, and I mean, the north of Ireland is a very divided society. I mean, going way back, the past several hundred years, but less so now than probably at any time for a long time, but still very, very divided society. So it's. And then, of course, many of the people who emigrate from Ireland, from either camp, they, especially in Scotland, and I don't know the whole history there, why Scotland so much, but especially in Scotland, they recreate the sectarian divide, even though they're both clearly living in a place that is not. Where the land was stolen. I mean, or not, or if it was a more complicated picture, and mostly a lot of Scots stealing land from other Scots. So not quite the same kind of picture as the sort of
land theft
settlement.
goes way back over there.
Well, it does. I mean, the thing is, of course, with the Scottish-English conflict, I guess going way back, many hundreds of years. Of course, a lot of the Scottish. Royalty was, the sort of nobility of Scotland, they were in various camps as well, including on the side of various English invaders and stuff. So it wasn't like quite the same, it wasn't like the picture of the people defending themselves against the invading, not quite like Braveheart.
You mentioned that you've played a bunch of high schools, but usually just once. Usually they wouldn't let you come back. You said that one you actually played twice before they got after the teacher and wouldn't let her hire you back.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think basically that one where they did let me come back was the first time was for a class and the second time was for an assembly. So I think this teacher in his classes he had pretty I think if any parent complained to the administration about what he was saying in his classes, I think the administration was prepared to defend him. But when it came to the assembly, it was really. I mean, I really still feel bad about that one because it wasn't like it was really unexpected because the parents. I don't think they were necessarily complaining about my anti-war, clear anti-war, anti-draft sort of message, like trying to convince these boys that they really don't want to join the army, which is what I always do when I go to high schools. But Attila was there with me, and he was doing something which is actually, I think, basically more or less culturally acceptable in England, but not in the United States, which was essentially promoting beer consumption to high school students. Making all sorts of jokes that were clearly, making it clear that he thought beer was a good thing and everybody should be drinking more of it, which, we have too much puritanical stuff left over here. You can't do that in high schools in the U.S.
And how do kids respond to you and your music?
Well, the thing is that kids, if they're in school, it's not a very good judgment, because they're just glad not to be in class, so they usually respond very well.
The Occupy movement. You've been, and well, actually, before that, I wanted to ask you. You mentioned your activity against the war, and I guess you were very much involved during the movement against the Iraq War, and you've done some work with IVAW, haven't you, with the Iraq Veterans Against the War?
Well, I mean, I sing for any progressive organization that's trying to do anything, when I can. I mean, I need to be able to pay for things like getting to the protest if it's on the other side of the country or whatever. But basically, when you say I work with anybody, I'm singing for them, as that's it. I'm not organizing or anything, just to be clear. But I've done lots of gigs involving IVAW and Vets for Peace and. Including some very notable, memorable ones here in Texas around the time of Camp Casey and the Vets for Peace conference in Dallas.
Yeah. What about the Vietnam vets? Have you been involved? had much contact? Because they're
Oh yeah, well, Vets for Peace is mostly
It's mostly
Vietnam
Vietnam vets, yeah.
That's I mean, Vietnam Veterans Against the War kind of split into two, and then sort of ceased to exist at some point in the 80s, I think. But then Veterans for Peace is where they all went, as far as I know. I think anybody who was active in VVAW, who wants to be active as a veteran today, would more likely than not be involved with Vets for Peace.
How much were you involved in the Occupy movement? And do you think that obviously that energy got dispersed when people got, because it was so much based on occupying spaces, and when people got kicked out of spaces, then there wasn't really an exit strategy. But do you think that energy is all out there waiting to sort of, burst forth again?
I think the energy is still out there, but it was definitely a huge plus to have physical spaces to occupy. That was a big plus, and it was much harder to work without a place. It's kind of like the squatting movement. It doesn't necessarily need to be a really large group of people at all times, but it needs to be a large enough group to hold down space. And which is easier to do when the police are nicer and the laws are better and stuff like that. But after 7,000 arrests and a hell of a lot of police brutality, and I think that's kind of what happened. But it was a fantastic thing while it was lasting. And I happened to do a tour that I landed in New York the day before the Wall Street protest, and so then I went there, and then I did a tour that basically turned into an Occupy tour, because all these camps were springing up in every town I was playing in. So after the gigs last fall, I would go to the Occupy camps. So I think I sang at about 30 of them around the U.S. and Canada. It was wonderful.
How much serious political education do you think was done was done by that movement, or happened as a result of the Occupy movement? I mean, it certainly made people aware of disparity, the discrepancies in income in this country and that kind of thing. It didn't really develop a class analysis, but there was a lot of, a sense once again that we hadn't had for a long time, that you can actually do things, that you can actually get out there, an idea that direct action is possible.
Absolutely. And it changed the whole scope of the discussion in terms of the mainstream media, because they were constantly every day in TV, radio, newspapers talking about the division of wealth. And then also in terms of political education at the Occupy camps, it was fantastic. And, I mean, it was very reminiscent of the sort of anti-capitalist movement around the WTO and IMF and all that, like 12 years ago. Mm-hmm. It was, the same voices, and also new ones, were coming to the camps and talking about the history and economics and politics. And there was a lot of real education going on. And, of course, there was also just a lot of, people who were living in a tent before the Occupy started, who were just glad to have a tent with other people.
Right. Okay, we're running down. This goes so fast. We've just got a few minutes left. Do one more song for us.
Sure.
David Rovics, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, I'll stick to Europe here. Okay. We'll move north to Norway, where there's a trial happening. They say he acted alone for a Europe white and free, a sick and twisted man from an otherwise sane society, the image of Aryan blonde, almost iridescent, with a manifesto quoting from the Crusades to the present. But he stood on many shoulders, of this we can be sure, a millennia of xenophobes who slaughter to be pure, since before the first crusade, when a mighty Christian band hacked and stabbed and burned their way to the Holy Land. They say he acted alone, but in his mind he was another of those who came before him, his mighty Christian brothers, who rode covered in armor, served their masters well. They vowed to chastity, they vowed to kill the infidel. They marauded west and east in the name of Christendom. They killed Jews, Muslims, pagans, fellow Christians by the thousand in the name of Jesus. From the Jordan to the Rhine, the Red Cross on their chest plates, their terrifying sign, in the shadow of the Knights Templar. They say he acted alone. No one said this of the Pope, whose victims were left burning or hanging from a rope. The Lord's own Inquisition, for 6 centuries, the ethnic cleansing of a continent, a Christian tyranny. European Jews and European Muslims fled the Christian caliphate to be protected by the Sultan. For 500 years they prospered beneath the Turkish sky. For those left behind, convert or die in the shadow of the Knights Templar. They say he acted alone, but he's living in a country where the xenophobic right is the second biggest party, and he's living on a continent that is overrun with prime ministers who tell us multiculturalism is done. They brag of their traditions, they swell with Christian pride for the civilization built on genocide. Anders Breivik pulled the trigger, but he did not write the play. That script was being written 1,000 years ago today, in the shadow of the Knights Templar. They say he acted alone, and they want us to believe that moderating rhetoric is the best we can achieve. But moderating rhetoric will bring us nowhere near to the understanding that the problem is right here. European empires, European greed, European Christians poison European seeds, European racists running European states, European tolerance for European hate in the shadow of the Knights Templar.
David Rovics on Rag Radio. So, what have you got going now? What have you got coming up?
San Marcos tonight.
San Marcos
at the
tonight.
Pavilion. San Marcos.
What else are you working on?
What am I working on? I'm working on.
What have
I'm
you got in the
spending the
works?
summer. I've been on tour all spring, and I'm spending most of the summer just chilling out at home and spending a week in Montana with my daughter doing gigs for children, and then in the fall I'll be touring all over North America.
1 minute, in about a minute and a half, I know another issue that you've been strong on and that you wrote a song about. I wish we had time to. It was Bradley Manning.
Yeah.
What do you think about what's happening with that and with WikiLeaks and?
I mean, as I'm so happy to say, we can hear people saying quite regularly on Democracy Now! And other stations, other Pacifica programs, the Obama administration has been going after whistleblowers more than any other administration, more than all the rest of the administrations in U.S. history combined. I mean, he is, this administration does not want anything getting leaked, and Bradley Manning is a hero and should be a hero for people around the world. And what he's done by leaking all that information is hard to overemphasize the importance of the information that he helped get out there. And he needs to be defended, and he should be given an award. He should have been one of those people getting the awards the other day, along with Bob Dylan and Toni Morrison. He shouldn't be looking at spending 2 life sentences in prison and being tortured and held in solitary and all this other crazy stuff.
David Rovics, according to Andy Kershaw of the BBC, if the great Phil Oakes were to rise from the dead today, he would probably be hailed as the new David Rovics. DavidRovics.com. That's where people can go to read your writing, to download your music, whatever.
And find out the address of the pavilion.
And find out the address of the pavilion, which is where David will be tonight in San Marcos.
Yes.
Very cool. This has been a delight.
Yeah,
thank you for being
Me
with us
too.
on
I
Rag
agree
Radio.
with
This
you.
has been fun. This show will be up at the Internet Archive probably tomorrow sometime. So you can go to the Internet Archive and search Rag Radio and we put them in order of the show. But you search David Rovics. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much,
This has been fun.
Thorne.
Okay, next week, author and journalist Ronnie Duggar, founding editor of the Texas Observer.
Oh, yeah.
Incredible. That's going to be just a delightful show. I'm just so happy to be able to see Ronnie again, because I haven't seen him for a long, long time. On June 15th, American Botanical Council Director Mark Blumenthal on alternative and herbal medicines. So, and then we've got some other really cool stuff coming up we'll let you know about later. Thank you, Tracy Schultz, for being with me. It's wonderful to have you back.
Oh, my pleasure.
This is Rag Radio. I'm Thorne Dreyer. KOOP, Hornsby, Austin.